The late autumn wind swept through the bustling streets of downtown as a sleek, black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Behind its tinted windows sat Richard Chen, a self-made tech millionaire whose life had become an endless cycle of business meetings and investment decisions. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and designer suit spoke of success, but the slight slump in his shoulders told a different story. As he stepped out of his car, a small figure caught his attention. A young girl, no more than 12, sat on the steps of the public library, completely absorbed in a worn paperback book. What struck him wasn't her shabby clothes or the fact that she was alone, it was the intense focus in her eyes, reminiscent of his own childhood days when books were his only escape. Richard found himself walking toward her, drawn by an inexplicable force. The girl looked up, revealing bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. Her name was May, as he would later learn, and she was one of the 27 children living at the Hope Haven Children's Home just 3 blocks away. "That must be a really good book," he said, gesturing to the novel in her hands. The corners of her mouth turned up slightly as she nodded, carefully marking her page with a frayed bookmark. "It's about a scientist who discovers time travel," she explained, her voice clear and confident despite her circumstances. "I want to be a quantum physicist someday. Did you know that according to quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states at once?" Richard's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Here was a child living in an orphanage, yet instead of dwelling on her situation, she was diving into complex scientific concepts. As they continued talking, he learned that May spent every free moment at the library, teaching herself advanced math and science from whatever books she could find. The conversation shifted when May asked about his work. Richard found himself opening up about his own journey, growing up in a small apartment above his parents' struggling restaurant, teaching himself programming on a second-hand computer, and eventually building his tech company from scratch. As he spoke, he noticed something change in May's expression. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "everyone at the home thinks being successful means getting adopted by a rich family. But I think real success is building something yourself, like you did. That way, no one can ever take it away from you." Her words hit Richard like a physical force. Here he was, a man who had everything money could buy, being taught a profound lesson by a child who had almost nothing. In that moment, he realized how far he'd strayed from his original passion for innovation and creating something meaningful. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the library steps, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was about to change both their lives. Before saying goodbye, he asked May if he could visit the home sometime, perhaps set up a proper study space for her and the other children. Walking back to his car, Richard pulled out his phone and cancelled his upcoming golf trip to Dubai. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine excitement. He had built his fortune by recognizing potential where others saw nothing, and in May, he saw not just potential, but a mirror of his own past and possibly the key to his future. What he didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. The story of the millionaire and the orphan would soon take turns that neither could have predicted, touching lives far beyond their own and challenging everything they thought they knew about family, success, and what it truly means to make a difference in the world. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, May returned to Hope Haven, clutching her beloved book and wondering if she'd see the kind businessman again. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his quiet home office, already drafting plans for what would become the most meaningful project of his life, though he didn't know it yet. The wheels of change had been set in motion, all because of a simple conversation on some library steps. Sometimes the biggest transformations begin in the smallest moments, when we're brave enough to stop and really listen to the wisdom that comes from unexpected places. The following week brought changes that nobody at Hope Haven could have anticipated. Richard's first visit to the children's home was eye-opening. The Victorian-era building had seen better days, with its peeling paint and creaky floors, but what struck him most was the warmth that somehow permeated the worn-down walls. Mrs. Zhang, the elderly caretaker who had run the home for over 2 decades, welcomed him with a skeptical kindness. She had seen well-meaning wealthy visitors before, full of grand promises that usually faded after a single photo opportunity. But something about Richard's quiet determination felt different. "May has been talking about you non-stop," Mrs. Zhang said, leading him through narrow hallways where children peeked curiously from doorways. "She's special, that one. Always has been. But life hasn't been easy for her." As they walked, Richard learned more about May's background. She had arrived at Hope Haven 5 years ago, after her grandmother, her last living relative, passed away. Despite the trauma, she had thrown herself into learning with an intensity that sometimes worried the staff. "It's like she's trying to build a ladder to climb out of her circumstances," Mrs. Zhang explained, her voice soft with concern. In the makeshift study room, which was really just a corner of the dining hall with mismatched tables and chairs, Richard found May tutoring younger children in math. She was explaining fractions using torn pieces of paper, her face lit up with the same passion he'd seen at the library. "Mr. Chen," she exclaimed, quickly composing herself to maintain her dignity in front of the other children. "I didn't know you were coming today." The other children watched with wide eyes as Richard pulled up a chair and joined their study session. He noticed their textbooks were outdated, their pencils worn down to stubs. One boy was doing calculations on the margins of an old newspaper. Yet their enthusiasm for learning matched May's. That evening, after spending hours talking with the children and staff, Richard sat in his car for a long time, his mind racing with possibilities. He had built his fortune creating educational software, but seeing these children's hunger for knowledge despite their limited resources gave him a new perspective. The next day, Richard canceled all his meetings and spent hours in his home office, drafting plans. He wasn't interested in just writing a check, he wanted to create something sustainable, something that would grow. By midnight, he had the beginnings of what he would call the Future Builders Initiative. Within days, the dining hall's study corner was transformed into a proper learning center, equipped with new computers, books, and learning materials. But Richard's vision went beyond just providing resources. He brought in retired teachers as volunteer tutors, created mentorship programs connecting the children with professionals in various fields, and most importantly, he showed up himself, 3 times a week, to work directly with the kids. May flourished in the new environment, but she wasn't the only one. Little Andy, who had always struggled with traditional learning, discovered a talent for coding through one of the new programs. Shai Lin found her voice in the public speaking workshops. Even the youngest children began to dream bigger, their artwork on the walls showing astronauts, doctors, and scientists where before they had drawn simple houses and trees. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some of the older children were skeptical, afraid to hope for too much. A few local newspapers picked up the story, painting Richard as another rich man trying to buy good publicity. The building's ancient plumbing chose that month to give up entirely, flooding the new computer room. Through it all, it was May who surprised everyone with her leadership. When the flood threatened to destroy their new equipment, she organized the older children into a rapid response team, saving most of the computers. When some kids felt overwhelmed by the new opportunities, she started a peer support system. "We're all in this together," she would say, echoing words she'd heard from Richard. Richard found himself learning as much as he was teaching. The children's resilience and creativity in the face of challenges reminded him of his own early days, when every setback was just a puzzle to be solved. He began bringing his laptop to Hope Haven, working on his company's projects there instead of his sterile office, drawing inspiration from the energy around him. One evening, as Richard was leaving later than usual, he overheard May talking to a younger child who was frustrated with a math problem. "You know what Mr. Chen told me," she said. "Every problem has a solution, sometimes we just have to look at it differently." Just like how he looked at our home differently and saw what it could become. Those words stayed with Richard during his drive home. He had always measured success in numbers, profit margins, stock prices, market share. But here, Success looked like Andy's proud grin when he debugged his first program, or Lynn's trembling voice growing stronger as she presented her science project, or the way Mrs. Zhang's worried frown had softened into cautious hope. As autumn turned to winter, Hope Haven began to feel less like a charity project and more like a second home to Richard. The children no longer fell silent when he entered a room. Instead, they called out greetings and rushed to show him their latest achievements. Mrs. Zhang had taken to saving him a cup of her special jasmine tea, served in a chipped mug that somehow made it taste better than any expensive blend he'd ever tried. But it was May who continued to be the bridge between these two worlds he now inhabited. She had a way of making him see things he might have missed, the importance of celebrating small victories, the power of patient persistence, the joy of helping others discover their potential. Without realizing it, she was teaching him as much about life as he was teaching her about business and science. As the year's first snow began to fall, dusting Hope Haven's old roof with white, Richard stood at the window of the learning center, watching the children play outside. He realized that what had started as a chance encounter on some library steps was growing into something far more significant than he could have imagined. This was just the beginning, and the real story was still unfolding, one small miracle at a time. Spring brought unexpected challenges to Hope Haven. As news of the Future Builders initiative spread, other children's homes across the city began reaching out, hoping to replicate their success. Richard found himself fielding calls from charity organizations and educational institutions, all wanting to know the secret behind the transformation. But it was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the real test of their progress arrived. A prestigious science competition had opened applications for young innovators, and May's quantum physics project had caught the attention of the selection committee. The only catch? Participants needed a legal guardian's signature. The revelation hit hard. Despite all the progress they'd made, despite all the new opportunities, some barriers couldn't be solved with computers or tutoring programs. Richard watched as May tried to hide her disappointment, burying herself in more advanced physics books. "I don't need competitions anyway," she said one day, her voice steady but her fingers fidgeting with her notebook pages. "I can learn just as well on my own." The situation sparked something in Richard. He'd spent months helping these children dream bigger, but now he faced the reality that dreams weren't enough. The system itself needed to change. After a sleepless night of research and planning, he called an emergency meeting with Mrs. Zhang and his legal team. "We need to think bigger," he announced, spreading out documents across the Hope Haven conference room table, which was really just the dining table after breakfast had been cleared. "It's not enough to provide resources. These children need advocates, legal support, and a pathway to opportunities that most take for granted." What followed was an intense period of activity. Richard's team began working on establishing a formal foundation that would provide legal advocacy for children in the system. Mrs. Zhang, who had initially been skeptical of such large-scale changes, became a passionate supporter, sharing her decades of experience in navigating the complexities of child welfare. The children of Hope Haven watched these developments with growing excitement. Little Andy, now proficient in basic programming, started developing a simple app to help younger kids with their homework. Lynn, who had once been too shy to speak up in class, began giving tours to visiting officials and potential supporters. But it was May who truly embodied the spirit of transformation. Working with Richard and a volunteer legal team, she helped draft a proposal for changes to competition entry requirements that would make them more accessible to children in group homes. Her practical experience combined with their legal expertise created a compelling case for reform. The process wasn't smooth. There were bureaucratic hurdles, skeptical administrators, and moments of deep frustration. During one particularly challenging meeting with education officials, May stood up and addressed the room with a clarity that left everyone stunned. "Every time you say, 'it's complicated,' what I hear is, 'it's not worth trying,'" she said, her voice firm. "But we at Hope Haven have learned that complicated doesn't mean impossible. It just means we have to work harder to find the solution." Her words became a rallying cry, not just for the science competition issue, but for the larger mission they were all becoming part of. Richard found himself repeating them in board meetings and interviews, watching as more people began to understand what he had learned from that first meeting on the library steps. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday morning. The competition board agreed to revise their requirements, accepting institutional endorsements in place of individual guardian signatures. It was a small change that would have huge implications, not just for May, but for countless other children in similar situations. That evening, Hope Haven held a celebration. Mrs. Zhang made her special dumplings, and the children put on a talent show that had everyone alternating between laughter and tears. Richard watched as May helped the younger kids with their performances, her natural leadership shining through in every interaction. "You know," Mrs. Zhang said, sitting beside him with a cup of her jasmine tea, "when you first started coming here, I thought you were just another rich man trying to feel good about himself." She smiled at his surprised expression. "But you've proven me wrong. You didn't just give these children resources, you gave them dignity." Richard looked around the room, taking in the scene. The walls were now covered with artwork, science projects, and certificates of achievement. Children who had once been hesitant to hope were now confidently discussing their future plans. The old Victorian building still creaked and groaned, but it had become a place of possibility rather than limitation. The foundation's work began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. Other business leaders, inspired by the model, started reaching out to children's homes in their own communities. Educational institutions began reviewing their policies regarding students in the system. Slowly but surely, the ripples of change were spreading. But for Richard, the most significant changes were the ones he saw every day at Hope Haven. It wasn't just about academic achievements or new opportunities, it was about the way the children carried themselves, the confidence in their voices, the light in their eyes when they talked about their dreams. May's quantum physics project was progressing well, her understanding of complex concepts growing deeper by the day. But perhaps more importantly, she had become a mentor to the younger children, showing them by example that their circumstances didn't define their potential. As spring bloomed into early summer, Hope Haven was buzzing with activity. The science competition was approaching, new programs were being implemented, and plans for expansion were taking shape. Yet amidst all the excitement, Richard often found himself thinking back to that autumn day on the library steps. He had thought he was the one offering help, but in reality, he had received something far more valuable, a reminder of what it meant to dream big, to persist despite obstacles, and to measure success not in dollars but in lives changed. The story of the millionaire and the orphan had evolved into something much larger than either of them had imagined. It had become a story about community, about challenging the status quo, and about the transformative power of believing in someone's potential. And they were still just beginning to understand where this journey might lead. The day of the science competition arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous energy at Hope Haven. May had spent countless hours perfecting her quantum physics presentation, working late into the night while helping other children with their studies during the day. The entire home had rallied around her, with even the youngest children making colorful good luck cards decorated with wobbly drawings of atoms and stars. Richard arrived early that morning, his usual confident demeanor slightly shaken. He found May in the study room, carefully reviewing her notes one last time. "Are you ready?" he asked, noticing how she had traded her usual casual clothes for a neat blazer borrowed from the home's donation closet. "I think so," she replied, then paused. "Actually, I'm terrified. But Mrs. Zhang says being scared means we're about to do something brave." The competition was being held at the city's premier science center, a gleaming glass building that stood in stark contrast to Hope Haven's weathered walls. As they walked through the entrance, Richard couldn't help but notice how May straightened her shoulders, facing the challenge head-on despite her nerves. The exhibition hall was filled with projects from students across the country, many from prestigious private schools with well-funded science programs. Some had parents fussing over their displays, making last-minute adjustments. May's section was simpler, but her presentation board was clear and professional, reflecting hours of careful work. What happened next surprised everyone, including Richard. As May began explaining her theory about quantum entanglement to the judges, something shifted in the atmosphere. She wasn't just reciting facts, she was telling a story about the interconnectedness of particles, relating it to her own experiences at Hope Haven. Her eyes lit up as she described how changing one particle's state could instantly affect another, no matter the distance between them. Just like how one person's actions can influence others in ways we can't always see, she explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. The mathematics of quantum mechanics shows us that everything in the universe is connected, even when it doesn't seem that way. The judges were captivated, not just by her understanding of complex physics, but by her unique perspective on its implications. One judge, a renowned physicist herself, spent an extra 20 minutes discussing theories with May, clearly impressed by her insights. But the real breakthrough came during the networking session afterward. As participants and judges mingled, sharing ideas and making connections, May found herself surrounded by other young scientists eager to discuss her work. Among them was Dr. Singh, the head of a prestigious research institute's youth program. "Your understanding of quantum mechanics is remarkable," Dr. Singh told her, "but what's even more impressive is how you've connected it to real-world applications. We need more minds like yours in science, people who can see both the equations and their human implications." Richard watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. This was May in her element, not defined by her circumstances but by her brilliant mind and determination. He thought back to their first meeting at the library, realizing how far they'd both come since then. The award ceremony brought another surprise. May's project didn't just win her category, she was awarded a special innovation grant that would fund her continued research. But it was her acceptance speech that left everyone in tears. "This award isn't just mine," she said, her voice cleared despite her emotion. "It belongs to every child at Hope Haven who helped me believe in myself. To Mrs. Zhang, who makes sure we never give up. To Mr. Chen, who showed us that success isn't about where you come from, but where you're determined to go. And to every kid in the system who's been told their dreams are too big, this is proof that they're not." The drive back to Hope Haven was quiet, both May and Richard processing the day's events. But as they pulled up to the home, they were met with an explosion of celebration. The children had decorated the entrance with handmade banners, and Mrs. Zhang stood at the door, trying to hide her tears behind a proud smile. That evening, as the celebration continued, Richard noticed something had changed in the way the other children looked at May. She had always been a role model, but now she was proof that their dreams were possible. Little Andy was already talking about entering next year's competition with his coding project, while Lynn had started a science club for the younger children. But it wasn't all celebration. Late that night, after most of the children had gone to bed, Richard found May sitting alone in the study room, staring at her award certificate. "Everything's going to change now, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Richard sat down beside her. "Change can be scary," he admitted. "But remember what you said about quantum entanglement? No matter what changes come, some connections can't be broken by time or distance." The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of opportunities. Dr. Singh's Research Institute offered May a place in their Young Scientists program, along with a scholarship for her future education. News outlets wanted to interview her, and other children's homes reached out to learn about Hope Haven's educational programs. But perhaps the most significant change was in Hope Haven itself. May's success had sparked a wave of ambition among the children. The study room was now packed at all hours, with kids working on their own projects and dreams. Mrs. Zhang had to implement a sign-up system for computer use, as more children wanted to learn coding or research scientific concepts. Richard, watching all of this unfold, realized that their story had entered a new chapter. What had started as a chance meeting between a millionaire and an orphan had grown into something much more, a movement that was changing not just individual lives, but the very system itself. As summer approached, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities, Richard often found himself returning to the moment that started it all. The library steps where he first met May seemed unchanged, but everything else had transformed. He had set out to help one child achieve her dreams, but in the process, he had discovered a new purpose for his own success. The quantum physics theory May had explained in her presentation seemed particularly apt now, how changing one particle could affect countless others in unexpected ways. Their story was proof that sometimes the smallest connections could lead to the biggest transformations. Summer brought both sunshine and shadows to Hope Haven. While May's success had opened doors, it also brought unexpected challenges. The media attention had made the quiet Victorian house a center of public interest, and not all of it was welcome. Some questioned whether a children's home should be pushing such intensive academic programs, while others suggested the children were being used for publicity. Richard found himself facing these criticisms head-on at a city council meeting. These children aren't being pushed, he stated firmly. They're being given the same opportunities that every child deserves. The only difference is that they're showing us what's possible when we believe in them. But the real challenges were more personal. May's participation in Dr. Singh's research program meant long hours away from Hope Haven, and she struggled with leaving the younger children who had come to depend on her. The science club she had started needed leadership, and her absence was felt deeply by everyone. One rainy afternoon, Richard arrived to find Andy sitting alone in the computer room, staring at a blank screen. The usually enthusiastic boy looked lost without his mentor. "I can't figure out this coding problem," Andy admitted. "May always helps me think it through, but she's not here." That moment sparked an idea. Richard gathered all the children for a house meeting, something that had become a tradition at Hope Haven. "I think it's time we talked about leadership," he began, looking around at their faces. "Success isn't just about achieving your own dreams, it's about helping others achieve theirs." Over the next few weeks, a new system emerged. The older children began taking turns leading study groups and mentoring younger ones. Lynn, who had once been too shy to speak, now ran the science club meetings with growing confidence. Andy started teaching basic coding to a group of eager beginners. Meanwhile, May was flourishing in her new program, but she never forgot her Hope Haven family. She would return in the evenings, tired but excited, sharing what she'd learned with anyone who would listen. Her experiences became inspiration for the other children, showing them firsthand what their futures could hold. Mrs. Zhang watched these changes with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "When I first started here," she told Richard one evening, "I thought my job was to keep these children safe until they aged out of the system. Now they're teaching me that safety isn't enough, they need wings to fly." The Future Builders initiative was evolving too. Richard's team had been working on expanding their programs to other children's homes, but they soon realized that each facility had its own unique challenges and needs. The solution came from an unexpected source: the children themselves. May suggested creating a network where children from different homes could connect and share their experiences. Like quantum entanglement, she explained to Richard, but with ideas instead of particles. The concept grew into a digital platform where young residents could share their stories, challenges, and achievements. The platform quickly became more than just a sharing space. Children from across different homes began collaborating on projects, supporting each other's dreams, and building connections that transcended their immediate circumstances. A girl from another home who loved art started giving online drawing lessons. A boy with a talent for music organized virtual choir sessions. Richard watched in amazement as the children took ownership of their stories. "We're not just cases in the system," one teenager declared during a virtual meeting. "We're scientists, artists, musicians, leaders, we're the future." The impact began to spread beyond the children's homes. Local schools reached out about partnership opportunities. Business leaders, inspired by Richard's example, started mentorship programs. The city council, which had once been skeptical, now looked to Hope Haven as a model for reform. But success brought its own set of challenges. As more opportunities opened up, the children faced difficult choices about their futures. May, in particular, wrestled with decisions about advanced programs that would take her away from Hope Haven for longer periods. During one late-night conversation in the study room, she confided in Richard. "Sometimes I feel guilty about moving forward," she admitted. "Like I'm leaving everyone behind." Richard thought carefully before responding. "Remember what you taught me about quantum entanglement," he said. "No matter how far particles move apart, they remain connected. Your success doesn't take anything away from Hope Haven, it adds to what's possible for everyone here." That conversation led to another innovation. May worked with Richard to set up a scholarship fund, not just for academic achievement, but for any child showing exceptional dedication to their chosen path. The first recipients included a young chef in training, an aspiring mechanic, and a budding environmental activist. As summer progressed, Hope Haven continued to transform. The old Victorian house had been carefully renovated, maintaining its character while creating more space for learning and growth. The library, once just a few shelves of donated books, now occupied an entire floor, with comfortable reading nooks and study areas. But perhaps the most significant change was in the children's sense of possibility. They no longer saw their time at Hope Haven as waiting for life to begin, they were already building their futures, one day at a time. One evening, as golden sunlight streamed through the library windows, Richard found May helping a group of younger children with their science projects. She looked up and smiled, and in that moment, he saw both the scared girl from the library steps and the confident young scientist she'd become. "You know," she said later, as they walked through the garden that the children had started as part of their biology studies, "I used to think success meant getting away from here. Now I understand it's about creating a path for others to follow." Those words echoed in Richard's mind as he drove home that night. What had started as a chance encounter had grown into a movement that was changing lives in ways he never could have imagined. And somehow, he knew they were still just beginning. As autumn returned to Hope Haven, bringing with it memories of that fateful meeting on the library steps, the home was buzzing with unprecedented activity. The Future Builders Initiative had caught the attention of a national education conference, and they wanted both Richard and May to speak about their revolutionary approach to empowering children in the system. The invitation sparked both excitement and anxiety throughout Hope Haven. For May, who had grown comfortable presenting her scientific research, the thought of sharing her personal story with hundreds of strangers was daunting. "What if they just see us as a feel-good story?" she confided to Richard. "We're so much more than that." Richard understood her concerns. He'd been wrestling with similar thoughts about how to present their work without turning it into another wealthy savior narrative. The answer came, as it often did, from the children themselves. During a house meeting to discuss the conference, little Andy stood up with an idea. "Why don't we make a video? Show them a day in our life here, not just the big achievements, but everything. The study groups, the cooking lessons, the times we fail and try again." The suggestion transformed their preparation. Over the next few weeks, the children worked together to document their daily lives at Hope Haven. Lynn, who had discovered a passion for filmmaking, took charge of the project. She captured moments that told their story in ways no speech could, children helping each other with homework, late-night study sessions, celebration parties for small victories, and even the occasional tears of frustration. The process revealed aspects of Hope Haven that even Richard hadn't fully appreciated. He watched footage of older children reading bedtime stories to younger ones, of impromptu science demonstrations in the kitchen, of quiet moments of friendship and support that happened when adults weren't around. Meanwhile, the home's programs continued to evolve. The scholarship fund had supported its first round of recipients, and their successes were inspiring others. The young chef in training had started a cooking program at Hope Haven, teaching other children about nutrition and kitchen skills. The aspiring mechanic was organizing weekend workshops on basic car maintenance, determined to pass on practical knowledge to his peers. Mrs. Zhang, who had seen countless changes during her years at Hope Haven, noticed something special happening. The children aren't just learning, she told Richard. They're becoming teachers. Each one who succeeds reaches back to help others up. The day before the conference, Richard found May in the garden, practicing her speech. The space had grown from a few experimental plants into a thriving community garden, with vegetables and flowers tended by children learning about biology and sustainability. I think I finally understand what we're really doing here, she said, looking at the flourishing plants. We're not just building futures, we're growing roots. Every child who comes through Hope Haven becomes part of something bigger. The conference itself proved to be a turning point. When Richard and May took the stage, they weren't alone. The video created by the children played behind them, showing the real heart of Hope Haven. May spoke about quantum entanglement again, but this time as a metaphor for community, how lifting up one person creates ripples that affect everyone around them. Richard shared the business perspective, but with a crucial difference. Success in business is usually measured in profits, he explained. But at Hope Haven, we measure it in possibilities. Every child who discovers their passion, every mentor who shares their knowledge, every small victory that leads to bigger dreams, these are our real returns on investment. The impact was immediate. Educational institutions wanted to partner with them. Government officials began discussing policy changes. Other business leaders approached Richard about replicating the model in their own communities. But the most significant response came from other children's homes. They weren't just interested in the programs, they wanted to connect with Hope Haven's children directly. The digital platform they had created became a hub of activity, with young people sharing their stories, challenges, and dreams across the country. Back at Hope Haven, the children were processing their newfound role as leaders in a national movement. It's kind of scary, Lynn admitted during a house meeting. People are looking at us as an example now. Good, Andy responded, surprising everyone with his firmness. Let them look. Let them see what's possible when someone believes in you. The conference also brought unexpected personal challenges. Several prestigious institutions had approached May about advanced placement opportunities. These would offer her incredible educational advantages but would mean leaving Hope Haven earlier than planned. Richard found her in the study room late one night, surrounded by brochures and opportunity letters. I don't know what to do, she said. These opportunities are amazing, but Hope Haven is my home. These children are my family. Drawing from his business experience, Richard helped her create a pros and cons list, but they both knew the decision went deeper than logic. It was about balance, between personal growth and community responsibility, between taking opportunities and giving back. The solution emerged gradually. Working with the institutions interested in May, they developed a hybrid program that would allow her to pursue advanced studies while maintaining her connection to Hope Haven. She would become a bridge between two worlds, showing other children that moving forward didn't mean leaving behind. As news of this arrangement spread, other opportunities began to emerge for Hope Haven's children. A local university offered to create special admission pathways for residents who showed exceptional promise in any field. Technical schools developed apprenticeship programs that could accommodate the unique circumstances of children in the system. The Future Builders initiative was evolving into something even more powerful, a network of opportunities that recognized and supported the diverse talents and dreams of children who had previously been overlooked by the system. One evening, as Richard watched the sunset from Hope Haven's porch, Mrs. Zhang joined him with her signature jasmine tea. You know, she said, when you first walked through our door, I thought you were just another rich man with big ideas. But you did something different. You didn't try to fix us, you helped us fix ourselves. Richard smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that autumn day on the library steps. What had started as a simple conversation with a girl reading about quantum physics had transformed into a movement that was changing the very fabric of how society viewed and supported children in the system. But as he looked through the window at the children gathered in the living room, sharing stories and dreams, he realized that the most important changes weren't the ones that made headlines. They were the small, daily moments of growth, courage, and connection that made Hope Haven not just a home, but a launching pad for countless possibilities. 1 year had passed since that first meeting on the library steps, and Hope Haven was preparing for a special celebration. The old Victorian house had witnessed countless transformations, but perhaps the most remarkable changes were in the lives it had touched. The occasion was a milestone celebration, the official launch of the Hope Haven Network, a nationwide alliance of children's homes implementing programs inspired by their success. Representatives from across the country were gathering to share stories and strategies, but more importantly, to witness the power of possibility. On the morning of the event, Richard arrived early to find May in the garden, which had become her thinking spot. She was surrounded by a new generation of young scientists, explaining the principles of photosynthesis using the plants they had grown together. "It's strange to think this all started because I was reading about quantum physics in the library," she said later, as they walked through the grounds. "Sometimes the smallest decisions change everything." The celebration was unlike any other charity event Richard had attended in his years of business. Instead of formal speeches and presentations, the children themselves led the day. They had organized workshops, demonstrations, and panel discussions, sharing their experiences and dreams with visitors from other homes. Andy's Coding Club demonstrated the apps they had developed to help younger children with their studies. Lynn's film documentary about Hope Haven's journey moved many to tears. The young chef in training had organized a catering team of residents, serving dishes that told their own stories of cultural heritage and creativity. But it wasn't just about showcasing successes. The children spoke openly about their challenges, their fears, and the ongoing struggle to overcome society's expectations. Their honesty made the achievements even more powerful. During a quiet moment in the celebrations, Mrs. Zhang found Richard watching the proceedings from the porch. "You know what the real miracle is," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It's not just that these children believe in themselves now, it's that they've taught us to believe in ourselves too." She was right. The staff at Hope Haven had transformed alongside the children. The once overwhelmed caregivers had become skilled mentors, learning from the children as much as they taught them. The old system of simply maintaining order had evolved into a dynamic community of growth and support. The Future Builders initiative had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a program to provide educational resources had become a movement changing how society viewed children in the system. Other business leaders, inspired by Richard's example, were starting similar programs in their communities. But success brought new challenges. As Hope Haven's model gained recognition, they faced questions about scaling their approach without losing its heart. How do we grow without becoming just another institution? May asked during a planning session. The answer came from their experience with quantum entanglement, the principle that had fascinated May from the beginning. Just as particles remained connected regardless of distance, they realized their strength lay in connections rather than size. Instead of creating a centralized organization, they developed a network of autonomous homes, each adapting the Hope Haven model to their own unique circumstances. The digital platform they had created became a hub for sharing resources, experiences, and support. May's role was evolving too. As she prepared for advanced studies, she worked with Richard to create a mentorship program that would allow her to stay connected with Hope Haven while pursuing her dreams. She would become a bridge between the academic world and the children's home system, showing others that success didn't mean leaving their roots behind. "It's like what you taught us about quantum physics," Richard told her. "Every particle affects the whole system, even from a distance." The celebration reached its peak with a surprise announcement. The state government, impressed by Hope Haven's results, had approved funding for a pilot program to implement their educational model across all children's homes in the region. It was a victory that would change countless lives. But perhaps the most touching moment came during the evening festivities. The children had prepared a special presentation, a series of letters written to their future selves, sharing their dreams and acknowledging those who helped them believe in possibilities. One young girl's words particularly struck Richard: "Dear future me, I want you to remember the day everything changed. Not just when we got new computers or books, but when we learned that our dreams matter. When we discovered that family isn't just about blood, it's about who believes in you when you're still learning to believe in yourself." As the sun set on Hope Haven, casting long shadows across the garden where their story began, Richard found himself reflecting on the journey. He had entered that library a year ago thinking he could change one child's life through his wealth and influence. Instead, he had discovered that true change comes from recognizing and nurturing the potential that exists in every person. May, now preparing for her next chapter while mentoring the next generation of dreamers at Hope Haven, summed it up perfectly during her closing remarks. People often ask what makes Hope Haven special. They want to know if it's the programs, the resources, or the opportunities. But the real magic isn't in any of those things. It's in the connections we build, the dreams we share, and the belief that every single person has the power to create positive change. The legacy of the Millionaire and the Orphan had become something far greater than either could have imagined. It wasn't just about individual success stories or program statistics. It was about creating a new paradigm of possibility, one that recognized that every child, regardless of their circumstances, deserves not just support, but the opportunity to soar. As the celebration wound down, Richard watched the children helping to clean up, each contributing in their own way. In their actions, he saw the future, not just of Hope Haven, but of a world where every child knows their worth and has the support to achieve their dreams. The story that began on those library steps had no real ending, because it lived on in every life touched, every dream sparked, and every barrier broken. It continued in the quantum entanglement of countless hearts and minds, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with a simple moment of connection between two unlikely souls who dare to believe in possibilities.